Here in studio from attorney Richard Heideman.
Well, actually, it's not a question. I'd like to put it in context, remind the world what this is all about. Hamas, which is the acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement, vows to destroy Israel. Hamas has long been a foreign terrorist organization, so classified by the United States of America. Hamas has the specific purpose of doing everything they can to disrupt and destroy lives in Israel and lives elsewhere. They are the avowed enemy. They have launched rockets for years. This is not just about the last 24 days and the terrible humanitarian situation. We have to go back and just remember barely 10 years ago in the raging intifada, Hamas was blowing people up all over Israel, in buses, in pizzerias, everywhere they could. And Hamas was taking responsibility proudly that they were murdering people and murdering Jews and murdering Israelis and murdering those from the infidels, including Americans. So therefore, that terrorist organization has to be stopped.
Chris? Yes, you can ask questions.
Could I ask you, sir, could you give me an example in military history of where a terrorist organization has ever been defeated by a conventional army? Just one.
If you take a look at just going back to 9/11 and the response of the United States against the terrorist organizations of the world, with President Bush declaring properly a war on terrorism, the terrorism that's going on around the world is being countenanced in relation to Gaza, in relation to Hamas, without remembering that Hamas is a terrorist organization intending to murder people.
With respect, sir, you're not answering my question. I mean, Al-Qaeda's, alive and well, thank you very much. I mean, look at the Islamic State of Iraq and other groups. They've declared an Islamic Caliphate virtually on the borders of Israel, just on the other side of the Golan. But answer my question, when has a terrorist organization ever been defeated by a conventional army? And let me also ask, don't you think that the engagement with the PLO, look at the engagement with the ANC, the African National Congress, transformed a terrorist organization into a government which eventually was headed by the Nobel laureate Nelson Mandela.
I'm really very sorry. You've taken this over to apartheid, attempting to paint Israel as an apartheid racist criminal state, which it is not.
I'm not saying that. That's really to misrepresent what I've said. I've not mentioned apartheid. I'm not comparing Israel with apartheid. I simply asked you a question. When in military history has a terrorist organization ever been defeated by a conventional army? And then I gave you some counterexamples to show where terrorist organizations have been transformed into responsible governments.
Chris, we're going to have to break here we have to break here, unfortunately, this conversation. I thank you for joining us this morning. I apologize for cutting you off. Thank you for joining us. We'll be here right back after this short break. Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. This is, of course, day 24 of Operation Protective Edge. Still with me in studio is attorney Richard Heideman. Attorney Heideman, thank you for staying with us. And Ariana, a comedian, which we're going to get to in just a few minutes. Richard, I do want to start with your work in Washington. You represent many different victims of terror, and in a way that perhaps is interesting here in Israel, because many times we're hearing on the news of many war crimes that are being directed to the Israeli government, universal jurisdiction in the UK for a while, and so forth. We don't really hear the stories vice versa.
Well, let's put what's going on today with Hamas in the context, as I mentioned before, in the context of the Second Intifada. Barely 10 years ago, Hamas and other terrorist organizations were determined to penetrate Israel, to blow up buses and cars and people at seders and people in pizzerias and even at the Hebrew University cafeteria. Designed to kill people under the guise of freedom fighting, but classic terrorism, straightforward, unabashed, and making the pronouncements that they were responsible and proud of it. Hamas is a terrorist organization, labeled so by the United States. I can tell you in no uncertain terms, not one rocket would be countenanced by the United States of America. So why the world seems to think it's something Israel should absorb, these rockets, thousands of rockets already launched. One more comment. My wife has on her iPhone Red Alert.
Right.
So sitting in Washington, we have been hearing minute after minute, section after section, all of the reports, and looking to see where the rockets are. The world seems to not care about that. The world seems to have no sense about that. The fact of the matter is it's blatant terrorism, and it has to be stopped.
Well, this blatant terrorism, of course, it's not maybe that the world doesn't care about it. Everyone takes their perception of what's going on the ground to an emotional part. And what you're trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is take it to the legal aspect, which has been mainly abandoned on Israel's side for a while. If you look at the pro-Palestinian groups that have taken many issue with Israeli officials, and I didn't mention universal jurisdiction for a reason. There's a way for Israeli officials to be banned from the UK at certain points.
The issue of universal jurisdiction is without a doubt a challenge. Let's put it in the context of the United Nations. As everybody knows, the United Nations in 2003 adopted a resolution referring to the International Court of Justice the issue of the legal consequences of Israel constructing the terrorism prevention security fence, referred to as the wall and referred to by some as the apartheid wall. That wall is not an apartheid wall. It's not even a border. It is a protective barrier to keep the terrorists out, and it has worked. Nobody complains about the wall between Gaza and Egypt. Nobody complains about the Great Wall of China, which was built for defensive purposes. Right. Only Israel is held to this triple standard of morality, of responsibility, and of necessary restraint.
And Israel does restrain,
and all under a legal umbrella. So the International Court of Justice issued this advisory opinion just 10 years ago, 2 weeks ago. In fact, we did in Washington the July 9th symposium. Ambassador Dermer came and was the keynote speaker and did a brilliant job. And Erwin Kotler came and spoke about humanitarian considerations and other considerations and did a brilliant job. And others came. And when you put in context the fact that at the United Nations, Israel has the lowest standing of any other sovereign nation in the world, as determined by one country, one vote. And when it's put to a vote at the United Nations, one country, one vote, Israel always loses. Nevertheless, she's fully engaged.
What do you attribute that to, though?
I contribute it to just...
No, what do you attribute this low standing popularity that Israel has in the
pure anti-Semitic bias, with an intent to show Israel as an immoral country, notwithstanding the morality of the Jewish people, to show Israel as a tyrant, notwithstanding the great respect for independence, freedom, democracy, freedom of speech. You go walk into Hadassah Hospital and see the people who are treated there from all walks of life. The world doesn't see it. The world doesn't seem to care, because when they have the opportunity to paint Israel as the oppressor, everybody piles on. It's not fair. It's not fair to a member state of the United Nations, maligned at the UN Human Rights Council by more than any, by all the countries of the world, with a concentration on Israel more than any other state in the world. And the new U.S. ambassador to the UN Human Rights Council, Keith Harper, has spoken out strongly about the fact that the council must focus on human rights violations around the world. Let's look just north at Syria. We have hundreds of thousands of people killed. We have millions of people displaced. And where's the world outcry? Instead, the world prefers to focus on Israel and blame Israel for everything, as if Israel were to blame, and Israel is not to blame for everything.
And besides your work and work of other attorneys pushing this issue forward, can Israel do something differently and push maybe the legal, its legal status forward in the world, and push legal arguments forward in the world that maybe it hasn't done as well as pro-Palestinian groups?
Well, Israel, in fact, follows the rules of law.
Right. In a PR sense, I'm saying.
No, well, let's just look at modern history. The United Nations adopted a partition resolution. It called for 2 states, a Jewish state, which became the State of Israel, called for an Arab state, which hasn't yet come fully into existence. It called for special status, protection of the holy places for Jerusalem. Israel, from that day on, as a member state, once it became a member of the United Nations, has followed the rules, followed the guidelines, promoted democracy, religious freedom, protection of access to the holy places for all religions, and concentrated on humanitarian and morality issues. But what Israel needs to do is send the message stronger.
Because in days of combat such as these, we're hearing, of course, mixed reports on the international media from UNRWA and so forth. Should Israel be taking a more proactive stance and maybe in a real-time stance saying, no, these rockets were actually going to be intended for Israeli citizens and thus it becomes a military target?
I think that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. I think that that's what Ambassador Dermer in Washington has said. I think that that's what Ambassador Prosor has said at the United Nations. The message is very clear from many people, but just take those 3 top leaders of Israel. The message is very clear. The recipient of the message has to be willing to hear it, and that includes the full array of the United States government to be really the friend of the greatest ally of the United States here in the Middle East, the greatest democracy in the entire Middle East. The United States has to say to the world, we stand with Israel because Israel is right in standing against terrorism and in standing also for individual rights and respect for liberty and freedom for all. Israel has made it clear. The Prime Minister has made it clear. He very much wants to achieve the true establishment of 2 states living side by side in peace and security. Whether everybody in his coalition does or not is not the issue here. But the message is very clear. He went to Bar Ilan and he delivered the speech. The speech is clear. President Bush delivered the speech of the 2-state solution on June 24, 2002 in his Rose Garden speech. Israel adopted the quartet's plan, adopted the roadmaps, pledged so to the United Nations. Israel went to the negotiation table, was at the negotiation table, and let me finish with this point. Let's remember, it was Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, the only person with whom Israel seems to be able, at the highest level of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO, to have, shall we say, a dialogue. But in the middle of those negotiations, he entered into a new agreement with Hamas, the terrorist organization, and look where we are today. It wasn't such a brilliant move. It was a move that has damaged peace, damaged security, and damaged the future stability, including the economic stability and the welfare of all the people in the region. I deplore all bloodshed. I feel terrible for every person, no matter their religion, no matter where they may live, who has been harmed or affected or tragically killed or displaced. Let's stop the terrorism. When the rockets stop, normalcy can resume.
Thank you for that. We're going to get a quick report now, update from our I-24 news correspondent, Daniel.